Hello, I'm Crystal Petry, and welcome to season 3 of the Crystal Petry Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. On today's podcast, we are going to learn how to grow your business internationally. We're also going to learn the difference between a yes and a real yes, whatever that means. And here to educate us all on those topics, I have Ben Greenberg on the podcast today. How are you, Ben?
Good, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me join you. This is great. Congratulations on third season.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you are on my third season.
Absolutely. Me
Yes.
too.
So, Benjamin, tell us, where in the world are you?
Well, I'm in Phoenix today, but although I'm here in Phoenix, I've been up since about 4:30 this morning. I've been on the phone with my colleagues in Dubai, in India, and in Ethiopia so far this morning, as well as clients in Mexico and Canada. So every day is exciting and very different. Always looking forward to our next adventure.
Yes. And you are, I feel like, the perfect person to talk to me and my audience about growing your business internationally. So, before we get into the thick of it, explain to us what it is you do that allows for you to speak with clients in Ethiopia and Mexico and all of these other countries. Of course, we are located in the United States of America, but you have clients all over.
Yeah, so the side of the story that I don't like to share very often, that I'll be happy to share with you is, back in the 80s, my father, who started our practice, unfortunately, he was caught up in a big scandal, one that he didn't cause, and not one that he was guilty of any wrongdoing. But back in the 80s, there was the major savings and loan scandal, where my father, he was the go-to appraiser for Charles Keating, and where I'm very proud is my father is the guy who didn't go to prison,
That's always
because
good.
it's really good, because it was very clear. What in our world, in the finance world, it's so often that there's a fall guy, and the appraisers in the banking world are very often that guy. But
Okay.
where we were very lucky in the situation is that my father was extremely ethical, which we'll get to as why I bring up this conversation. But we were able to very clearly show that here's his value, and then there was always a second appraisal that was either half or double the value of his, and that's what they ended up lending on.
Okay.
So after having a beautiful invitation to testify in front of U.S. Congress and all that came with that, he was also invited not to continue work with banks because of reputation.
Okay.
And so at that point, he had to be creative and find ways to continue his career, but with a new profile of clientele. And so he started off doing prisons and airports and other difficult types of asset classes in the real estate space that other colleagues of his weren't touching. And then by accident, it all starts with a good story, right? By accident, my parents decided to buy a timeshare in a town called Puerto Peñasco, which is known as Rocky Point, which is a 3.5-4 hour drive from both Phoenix and Tucson. I grew up in Tucson, and not knowing Spanish, not reading or speaking the language, my father, he signed a credit card statement for $15,000 to purchase that timeshare, not knowing that the company was in bankruptcy. And so as soon as he learned this, he said, well, we're going to get our money's worth. And growing up with 4 siblings, large family, being a drive away, and I think we're paying something like $30 a night for a place on the beach, we took advantage of that. And we would spend 50 nights a year in Puerto Peñasco. It was very often that we'd wake up Monday morning at the crack of dawn and cross the border and be at school just in time, right? And that's how we would spend our weekends growing up, and it was absolutely wonderful. But at some point, a judge had asked my father, hey, you're always in Rocky Point. Can you help us with this divorce case or bankruptcy case, whatever it was, which included a home in Puerto Peñasco. And so that's how it started on accident, right? And one day, my father was at the bar, and at this point, I was still in my teens. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but my father was at the bar and overheard this gentleman say that he was starting to do mortgage lending for Americans and Canadians for their second homes in Mexico. And
Okay.
being bashful, my father went up to him and said, "Well, who's doing your valuation work?" And he said, "Well, that's something we haven't been able to figure out yet." And he said, "Well, I think I'm the most experienced MAI performing valuations in Mexico."
What is
That's,
MAI?
so an MAI is a member of the Appraisal Institute. It's
Okay.
your equivalent of the like a PhD, but specifically to the valuation field.
Okay.
And so that's how it started. And we grew it. So that was in the early 2000s. And at that point, we started our approach into providing valuation services for second homes. And then one day, the gentleman who's now the owner of the Sotheby's franchise in Cabo San Lucas, and he's a very successful entrepreneur, real estate investor in Cabo San Lucas, said to us, "You guys are far more advanced and far more knowledgeable than doing residential real estate appraisals. Why are you doing this, and what more can you do?" And that's really how our business in the international space kind of grew, based on people recognizing that there was a gap and opportunity in the space for us to enter and bring our quality and reputations with us on the positive side. And from there, we just kind of kept growing. And here we are. That it all started 1999 is when that first conversation happened, and here we are. Was almost 26 years later, 27 years later, and we've done almost 10,000 assignments around the world.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's such a great story. It's like a guy walks into a bar story.
Pretty much. It's exactly what it is. And not all bad things happen from tequila.
This, oh my God. Oh, that completely caught me off guard, but you are correct. You are correct. Okay, so let me gather myself here. This is a two-part question for you, Ben. Why would someone want to grow their business internationally? And the second part of that question is, how does someone know that they are ready to start growing internationally?
Well, let me start with the first. How do you know you're ready? You never know you're ready. You have
Okay.
to really go with your gut. How do you identify? You need to really understand what your product is, and you have to beat it up. One of the most important things going internationally is you're going as a lone wolf. Relationships and reputation means everything going into international arena. When this started off, it was very clear that we were the gringos that were entering into the Mexican market, and our clients were the gringos and nothing more. And it took years and years and years of repetitive attendance and being present and providing results that finally got the attention from the nationals to say, what is it that you have that you can bring us? And part of it was you have to, one, be respectful of where you're going, right? For myself, I've been fortunate enough now to travel to 37 countries around the world. And although there's no way for me to speak 37 languages, and we're very fortunate that the majority of the world tries to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as important. If you're going to travel or if you're going to work internationally, you have to try, right? So for instance, when I decided that not only were we going to do work in Mexico, but actually move to Mexico, which I did, and I lived in Mexico City for 10 years, um, it was important to me that I learned the language. And so, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. And at the age of 30, I forced myself to start learning a second language. And I will never tell you that I'm fluent. I will
Mhm.
tell you I'm conversational at best. My daughter, thankfully, she's fluent and raised from birth speaking Spanish. She was born in Mexico City. She's got the dual citizenship, and I'm very jealous and grateful at the same time. Um, it's important that you recognize that whatever it is that you want to offer,
Mhm.
you are coming in as a foreigner, and you have to, that's the number one thing that has to be on your list. No matter how wonderful and how great and how successful you are in your market, you are nobody in that market until you're there.
Mhm.
And reputation, once you're there, is absolutely everything. So one of the ways that we grew our reputation in the market was we called people out for their truth. And as harsh as that seems, in our world of valuation services, independence is everything. And when we go into a market and we speak to somebody and they say, here's the information that you need, and we know it's untruthful, or they say, I'm not going to provide it to you. What we did differently in that market is we literally wrote it into the reports that this person, this developer, this investor, this agent, this whoever we spoke to provided us false information,
Wow.
would not cooperate, would not do X, Y, and Z. And what ended up happening is the international investors loved it because they knew the quality of work that they were getting from us. And the local guys started questioning what it was, right? And
Mhm.
so from there, this reputational shift started happening for us, where we would literally have these people who in their market were the who's who come to us and say, why would you ever put into a report that I was not cooperative? And we would say,
Wow.
it's not. We would educate them that, listen, we're not here to beat you up or to destroy what you have. Our goal is to facilitate international investment into your country right now.
Mhm.
Our opinion brings more investment to you. And what our actions are doing are creating the pathway for them to not only trust in international developers who are coming and investing in your market, but also giving them the opportunity to see who are the transparent and successful professionals in that market that they can start expanding with, because at the end of the day, they're going to have a lot more success with a local professional than with a foreigner coming in trying to learn it.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
our path to get there was rocky. It
Mhm.
was hard at times, but we got there. And literally one day we got a phone call from the Secretary of Housing's office in Mexico saying, we hear that there's a gringo running around town who is writing values on real estate assets here in Mexico. What does this mean? And from there, we started educating government professionals. We started, we were invited at the highest levels to educate, and to the point where we were the team that was hired to write the equivalent of USPAP. USPAP in the United States is a Uniform Standard Professional Appraisal Practices. That's
Okay.
the governing law that oversees the ethics and standards for valuation practices in the U.S.,
Okay.
overseen by the U.S. Congress. And we were invited to write the equivalent of that federal law for the Mexican federal government. So, it's taking baby steps, and that didn't happen until that happened in 2015. So it took us 25 years to get to that point. But the way that we were able to not only take from the country by growing our careers and success, but give back. And that's truly important. And so we work diligently to provide education programs and introductions to global influencers and professionals and all that, to stand by our side to say to our peers in the international market, we're here to help you grow, not to take away.
Ben, for me, it started with the respect. So that was the first thing you said about growing your business internationally, respecting the country that you are in, respecting the people that you're in, understanding that you are the visitor here, you are the foreigner in that country. And I think that's so important because, and I'm American, but I'm going to say this, a lot of times when Americans go into other countries, we have this kind of bravado, like we're Americans, regardless to what country we're in, we're still bigger and better and badder than, the country. But, the fact that you said you have to respect the country, you have to respect their culture, their people, even the language is so important. And I think that's huge in how you guys have been able to grow your business internationally and stay there as well.
No, and we call that the tequila sunglasses, right? People go from, the most vacation to senior executives and major corporations going to foreign markets, right? Where we see it all the time, expectancy and not, we're very fortunate that we speak the language that so many others have gone above and beyond to learn.
Correct. Yes.
And
that helps.
When you try, I listen, there's been many conversations where I destroyed and butchered the language, but I tried. And the fact that I tried meant all the difference to the person sitting across the table from me.
Right.
And those attempts and tries are what got us to sit in invitations to sit with presidents to advise them on our world evaluation. Like that's, if I came in there with an attitude and with a chip on my shoulder, and same with my father, obviously we would not be where we are today. And it's been a wonderful journey for us because we started off, crossing the border, driving back and forth. And now as I mentioned, we've done over 10,000 assignments in 67 countries around the globe.
Amazing. Real quick, the country Grenada, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, they are looking for exactly what you guys do. So they have recently started, and if you've heard about this, stop me. They have recently started a citizenship by invitation to get people to come into their country and do valuations, exactly like you're doing and your company is doing, and to help them build infrastructure there.
Yeah, no, I didn't know about Grenada in particular, but this last month I've been working with our partners in Rwanda, helping educate them in a similar fashion. There's a trend towards standardizing ethics. That's something that we shouldn't be afraid of. It's something that we should be encouraging from all across the board, right? And so, the moment somebody says to us, here's the value I want you to achieve, that's when we as professionals, if we are conforming to standards, we say, we appreciate it. I can't work for you anymore. Right? Because now I'm a biased professional. Listen, our goal is always to help our clients achieve their goal. But that's why, guys, by doing that, this is the reason why we make, and no offense to any attorneys who are listening to us, but this is how we make the legal system wealthy, right? Because when you go into that mediation arbitration period, you got three sides to every story. And of course, there's going to be an argument between the counter sides because the scope is different, right? But if we come in there with a non-biased approach from the start, we can resolve things a lot quicker, no matter where in the world we are.
Right, right. Now, the second part of that question being, why would someone want to grow their business internationally?
One, for the experience. It's beautiful. I've gotten, like, the fact that I can go to most anywhere in the world and pick up a phone and have dinner with somebody, or it's wonderful. That, for me, that's one of the most enjoyable part of what we've built. But from a business perspective, it's because you actually bring value,
Okay.
and it needs to be, it can't be selfish, right? You need to know what your value is, but again, your value means nothing to them until you educate them, right? So it's not, in that respect of not being selfish. It really comes back to wanting to give, and to be able to say, I have something special that works really well here, that can provide value to you in your nation. I'm asking you to invite me to bring it to you. That's really the way you need to approach it, right? Because if you go in there and say, this is it, you're going to get pushback. There's so many brands all over the world who have tried to enter and have failed,
Mhm.
right? And it's because they don't partner, they don't listen, they don't respect the local culture. And that's why, if you go to a McDonald's in Thailand, you're going to see a very different menu than the McDonald's you see in India and the McDonald's you see anywhere else in the world, because they're catering to their local market,
Right.
right?
I never thought about that, but you are correct.
You'll see some
Yes.
things on the menus in McDonald's around the world that you would have had zero idea could have been offered in a fast food restaurant.
But you're right. They're respecting the culture, respecting the people.
And then there's companies that have failed tremendously. Costco, when they entered China, it was not a success for them, because they came into it that this is what the Americans like. Here you go, right?
Mhm.
And they learned their lesson really quickly.
Okay, so if someone who's listening, who's watching, Ben, they're ready to, well, you said you're never ready, but they feel like they're ready
Mm-hmm.
to grow their business internationally. How do you determine the first country to enter to start that expansion?
So, number one, you have to find time. Like, listen, for us, it was based on where we spent time as a family,
Mhm.
right? So that personal connection goes a long way. When I tell my clients, when I go to Cabo for work, where they're so used to people coming for vacations and all that, and when I say to them, yeah, I've been coming here since I was 16, they don't hear that very often, right? And it's not that I've been coming since I was 16. I've been to Cabo maybe 75, 100 times. I have no idea, right?
Okay.
And out of those 75, 100 times, I think I've been there for vacation twice, right? Uh, but well, no, that's not true. When I first started going as a kid, that that was vacation. But in my adult life, I've only been there a few times for vacation, right? But it's having a personal connection. That's that's, in my opinion, is the best way to approach it. One, by doing that, if you continue that,
Mhm.
and you allow yourself to be part of the community, then you start getting local contacts. So that's part of it, right? It's not just going there, but it's being present there.
So you feel like you should go to whichever country first, spend some time there, get to know people, network, make connections
100%.
before you expand.
100%.
Is there a, I'm sure there's not like 100% foolproof, but how do I know which country to go to? Like, do I first go to Mexico and build those relationships? Do I go to Ethiopia and build those relationships? How do I know that part?
Well, right. I mean, you're not going to go to the North Pole and sell them ice, right?
Yes.
So you really have to think about what your product is and where you bring value. And you also have to understand that on the global scale, the US economy is this,
Mm-hmm.
and China is this,
Mm-hmm.
and India is this, and then Canada is this, and then the
Right.
UK is this. And I mean, you have to identify how much work you want to put in and how big of a pie do you want to achieve, right?
Yes.
So one, if you have the same expectations of growth or success that you do here in any other market, be skeptical of your own expectations and interview, have conversations, go break bread, go have drinks, go find the right people. I mean, when I started off in Mexico, the only person I knew going when I started working as a professional in Mexico, the only guys who I knew at that point were the bartenders that from the bars I went to as a kid, right? I didn't
Yeah.
have friends there. I had to start from scratch. And, very fortunate of my story. Um, I found social events that I would just start attending and created relationships and friendships with people who helped pave that way for me and made introductions for me so I can really create a path and journey. And at that point, we were very successful in the tourist markets with the foreign investors. But
Okay.
that for me, that wasn't giving back. That was us taking. And I wanted, when we leave this world to leave a mark, right? And for the positive. My grandfather, unfortunately he passed when I was 5, but I literally remember one main thing from him is we're born with 2 hands,
Mm-hmm.
one to give and one to take. And if one's more powerful than the other, that's your direction in life.
Wow.
And especially when you're going into a foreign market, that's how you have to think.
I love that you think that way, wanting to give more than you receive. And honestly, Ben, the way I'm thinking about it as you're teaching and you're educating us is you give so much more, you give, you give, you give. Eventually that hand's going to flip and you're going to receive, receive, receive.
And you don't want to be taken advantage of either,
Yeah.
right? And there's like Mexico has so many things that are so obvious as humans that I embrace incredibly, right? Like trust is part of their culture. For instance, when you are having a drink in most places in the world, when you do a cheers, you look at each other in the eyes. In the
Mhm.
US, that's not how we are, right? Like people are starting. It's really funny because I started recognizing that it's starting to happen more, and as we accept more people internationally here, and it's becoming more the norm. But I didn't grow up like that. Like at first, it was very awkward to like stare somebody in the eye,
Mhm.
right?
I never
Um,
even noticed that we don't do that
we
until
don't
you
do
just
that.
said we don't do it.
We don't do that. And in Mexico or most places around the world, you give each other a hug, hello. You give each other a kiss on the cheek, right? And we don't do that here, and even
No,
to people that we meet for the first time, right? That's
correct.
that's 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 common practice there. And so it's just and all those come down to trust, right? And it's really funny. So the reason why they hug when they meet, and this
Mhm.
goes way back into the 1800s or probably even before that, is you'll notice when Mexicans greet each other, they shake with one hand and pat their hand around the back on the other side of the person
Right.
for trust. Why? They're checking to see if they're a safe person, if they have any arms around them, like, right?
Oh.
It was a form of protection, right? And that practice came around the need of trust.
I never knew that. You're
Yeah.
teaching me so much I never knew. Wow. Okay. Okay. So, how does someone adapt their services or their products? And you touched on this a little bit talking about McDonald's
Sure.
and Costco, but how does someone adapt their services or their products to different international markets?
Sure. So let me talk about our industry in particular, just to kind
Okay.
of relay that. So we're spoiled here in the United States when it comes to access to data, right?
Okay.
We've got in our space, we've got, it used to be one major player in the commercial real estate space that
Hmm.
owned the majority of the data. And now they've got good 5 competitors there. And even before the competitors, the data was really good, right? You have the MLS for residential. And,
Right.
we've got, I can tell you, we have approximately 155 million property records, properties across the United States. 32 million are commercial, the rest residential. In
Okay.
other countries, we can't tell you that, right?
Wow.
Um, so, so, that's a good example. Is we have to find solution for that. So the best way to create the solution in our space is relationships. So over the years, we've had to work diligently to create the relationships with the real estate agents, with the title agencies, with the attorneys, with the developers, with all the different
Wow.
parties. So that way, when we walk in a room, they know why we're there.
Hmm.
And they also don't want to be written in the report saying that they did not cooperate, right?
Yes.
Um, so it's you have to identify what is the difference first,
Okay.
and you have to create a business plan as to how you're going to resolve that differentiator between what you understand and what you're going to uh, be met with in that place, because you cannot change them,
Hmm.
right? We can try, and there are other foreigners that are in Mexico, in Brazil, in other countries all over the world now, and even national guys who are watching us, who are seeing best practices here, to create those types of mechanisms and accesses to data. But it's getting there slowly, right? And so that yes, that can be a solution in a specific market, but it may not. Like, I can tell you that right now there's a platform that uh, we work with very closely, data platform that has excellent data in Mexico City, in Monterrey, in Tijuana, in Guadalajara, but in the tertiary markets, they don't have it, right? And so we kind of start from scratch in those markets and fall back to old practices. And the way I say it is, when people ask us how are we successful in foreign markets, I say you need to have a pair of dirty sneakers. You have to learn to get dirty, and you have to go back to the roots of how our industries were created. Because my first job was as a kid, scraping the sticker off on the photo that said subject property or
Oh
whatever
yeah. Yeah.
whatever it was, and then taking that and pasting it into the report. That's a good job for a 5-year-old, right? But yeah, we don't have that anymore. Even internationally, that's not the way it is. But
Mhm.
the fundamentals of how you collect data in the market, they're the same as where we came from.
Okay.
And so it's really respecting how you got there, and you have to take them from those
The antiquated
initial.
way.
Mhm. And gradually get them there. You cannot expect them to jump overnight. Anybody, right?
Right, right. Let's talk about data a little bit more, Ben. So we understand how to collect the data. What is some of the, and I know this is a general question, but what is some of the data that you feel like is most important to to get and to calculate, and how do you read that data or
Sure.
understand that data?
Sure. So the most important thing is partnerships for us, as because we're no longer focusing on a single foreign country, right?
Mhm.
We're touching 67 countries around the globe. I don't know when, like, every time I go somewhere, I say, I don't know when I'm going to be back in this country, but I'm going to do my best. Like Ethiopia, like never before did we have an assignment in Ethiopia. We got one, and I had to go through the routes to find somebody local that I can partner with, that can be my resource, and create that trusted relationship and hope that we see them again. Well, thankfully, perfect example right now is we have a new job in Ethiopia, and now that relationship like is so much easier, so much more like we're entering into that market with this next project with no nerves of what we need to achieve or who we need to contact or do, right? And I'll tell you what, some of the friendships that I've created around the world, they're amazing. Like, our partner in Dubai, Russ and I, we've never met. We've never met.
Really? So just like virtuals and phone calls.
Majority of our partners around the world, we've never met in person. Like we
Okay.
try our best. We try our best, but we can't be in every place. And Russ, like we have a conversation at least once a week where we aren't talking about projects that we're working on together, but we're talking about best practices. We talk a lot of personal too, but we talk about best practices because he's watching what we're doing here in the US with our valuation teams locally, asking how we do X, Y, and Z. And the funny thing is, we have gotten him to the point where to understand some of the best practices that we've taken on here in the US. We have a wonderful team of developers, programmers, and researchers that work for us in India. He's now using them too.
Wow.
And so it's
okay.
like, we're having such a wonderful time, like not only creating one-on-one relationships, but we're creating this network. And then hilarious, 2 weeks ago, I was on the phone with our partner in Morocco, and he says to me, "You'll never believe how small of a world it is." My business partner here in Morocco, he just got back from Dubai, and the one person he came back saying that he met was Russ in Dubai.
No.
So, and it wasn't a planned introduction or anything. They just happened to meet randomly. And like, that's how small of a world we truly live
It
in.
is. It really is. So what would you say, if you could, I'm sure it's a lot, would be the most important piece of data that someone needs to collect internationally that would help their business grow internationally?
I don't know where you can collect this, but it's
Mhm.
called trust.
Which starts with respect.
It starts with respect. If
Wow.
people do not trust you or
Mhm.
respect you, you're not going to be successful. And the product can be the best product in the world and it can bring huge value. But if they don't respect you, you're asking to enter into their market. You have to respect them.
Yes, yes. What about, and I feel like I might know this answer, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, Ben. What
Please.
about hiring people in the international market? How do you go about doing that?
I love this topic. So I have staff in India, South Africa, Mexico City, Merida, and we have partnerships all over the world,
Okay.
literally all over the world. And I'm constantly working to expand that network. Um, One, you have to understand there's a difference,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be respectful of the difference. I can tell you that when Deloitte acquired our company to start their real estate practice in Mexico, for me, it was so exciting, right? I get to join this global organization and be part of, and I'm coming in as an executive level. This is wonderful.
Yes.
I did not walk in the door with hugs and kisses. People were scared. People were
Okay.
concerned that this guy was coming in and taking their jobs. So, you always have to, you're always having to continually create that trust and provide that respect in order to be successful. I mean, just, if you're expectant, that's your fastest road to failure.
Okay, so Let's talk about, and you said this term when we spoke like the first time before we got on our podcast. Understanding you had to learn the difference between a yes and a real yes.
Yep.
And I was like, what does that even mean?
Yep.
So for me and for my audience, man, explain to us, what is the difference between a yes and a real yes?
So have you had the experience where you donated to the Red Cross because you felt passionate about, the fires in LA or whatever it was, and you made a donation
Yes.
and you felt good about it,
Yes.
but then you keep getting the phone calls to asking you to donate more, and you finally pick up the call and say, "Yes,
Yes.
I'll do it," but you never do it,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Right? That's that type of yes,
Okay.
right? It's especially, and what I found in foreign markets, especially in Latin culture and Indian culture, many cultures, um, that respect of people is very much like shielded and guarded and respected. And people don't want to say no because it's offensive,
Oh, okay.
right? And so very often you'll hear a yes just because they don't want to offend you.
Mm-hmm.
And so so if you're getting a yes, my best practice is always, okay, next step. Identify what the next step is and actually hold responsible yourself and the other party to that next
Right.
step. Or else you don't know if you were getting the push off because you already donated, and you're saying yes just to get them off the phone, right?
Correct. Correct.
So it's you have to identify, how the level of communication with that person truly was. Were
Mm-hmm.
they saying yes because they want to kindly say thank you, no thank you, or are they saying yes because they truly want to do business with you?
How long did it take you to learn the difference between the yes and the real yes?
I've had lots of the other yeses,
Okay.
right? I mean, it happens all the time in all of our business, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just, when you're dealing with a market like this where it's kind of controllable, it's harder to do those kinds of yeses because, reputational risk in our industry and our community and our groups and all that. But as you grow and you're reaching into different communities and spaces, it's hard to manage those relationships in all places, right?
Okay.
And that's what you really have to do, is you have to be able to, I mean, you look at each, especially when you're growing on an international basis and you have specific um, persons of influence that help your business, whether they're clients or partners or whatever it is, that I see every client as a partner because we're here where we are because they brought us on as their partner in
Absolutely.
that project, right? You just have to kind of manage those communities, those micro communities, to be able to have that confidence.
When someone gives you a not real yes, I know you, well, let me start this over. Okay, you said when someone tells you yes, then you follow up with, okay, the next step, or what is the next step? Holding each other accountable for the yes.
So,
If,
those phone calls that you get from the Red Cross that you keep avoiding. I
yes,
mean, that's not who we are, but we try to take that step ahead and step up the communication to them so that way they have the confidence from us. Um, and at some point you just kind of, you will learn very clearly it's not a yes, right? When they're not responding, when they're not
mhm,
fulfilling their obligations, and you kind of have to learn to sense it early on,
okay,
just as we do in our small micro communities here, right?
yes,
I mean, you just have to, you really have to be attuned to it. And when there's a language barrier, when there's a cultural barrier, you have to really perk up those antennas a little bit higher and react a little bit more, right? It's like you have to think about like when your body's not feeling good, you pay attention to it or you allow it to get sicker, right? And
Mhm.
if you keep chasing, if you keep avoiding that uncomfort, that eventually turns into, getting sick or whatever it is, you're affecting yourself. And that's exactly how you have to kind of look at those relationships is at what point do you just cut it off and, take the pill to get rid of the pain.
Right, right. Is there body language cues for a yes or a real yes, or does it really only boil down to reading the room and understanding what's going on?
Well, 100%, because in certain cultures, this means yes.
No, shaking your head, no
Correct.
means yes.
Correct.
What? So
So
confusing.
it really can be. And like in India, that's a very common, uh, like that's how they'll nod yes, like when they're listening and agreeing. And it took me
Yeah,
so long to understand that. I'm like, why is he always disagreeing with me? He's not.
right.
That's my problem. I'm asking them to work with me. I need to figure out what they're trying to say to me.
Yes, correct, correct. Okay. Yes. Yeah, that is definitely confusing. Okay, what about like the negotiations? How does that work when like your cultures are different and someone's saying yes or giving you a real yes or shaking their head no, but they mean yes. It's
Yeah.
all very confusing.
Yeah, no, and here in the US, like it's much easier to do business in my mind, from the sense that here's my product, do you need it, yes or no? Okay, move to contract, right?
Right.
I can tell you that my best clients today,
Mhm.
they did not just what have that type of relationship with me to get into their pockets. I invested into them. Would spend time with them, whether it was on a one-on-one basis, constantly seeing them at conferences and events, engaging with them. We started doing newsletters 25 years ago, or 20 years ago,
Oh,
20 years ago,
okay.
because we wanted to make sure that we were seen constantly, consistently,
Top of
right?
mind.
Top of mind, top of
Yes.
mind. And so eventually the who's who of the Mexican community became our friends and clients.
Mhm. How does someone, and if you've been able to do this, please, educate us. How does someone turn a fake yes into a real yes?
Sometimes you can't,
Okay.
and sometimes they're just using you to understand how they would do X, Y, or Z without you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they just don't have the intention to ever say yes.
Okay.
There is no correct answer to that. It really, it's again paying attention to those antennas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And engaging in people and actually talking to people and getting to learn them for who they are, not for what they give you.
Right, right. Okay, we are getting ready to wrap up this interview, Ben, but I just have a few more questions here. You have been doing this for so many years in so many different countries. What do you feel like Americans can learn about doing business from the international business community?
One, that regardless of politics, we all want the same thing. We want to provide good lives for ourselves, our families, our loved ones, our friends. We want to be able to uh, benefit from the best of life, no matter what the politics say, right? Um, that when I go to foreign markets, I'm not going there to speak politics to them. I'm going there to create relationships. It's if you don't go in there with the mindset of relationship, you're there for financial purposes only. God bless you. Hope you're successful. I don't see that as the correct avenue for our business.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that it's really about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. You have to learn how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that for me was what I strived. I'm back in the US, not for, I didn't have plans to come back to the US. For other reasons, I had to come back here 4 years ago, but um, I loved that every day was a challenge. I loved that the people who was getting the opportunity to face one-on-one with were the who's who, and I had to go out of my way to be on top every single day, to be present, to put my full effort forward. And whether I butchered the language or not, I'm going to try my damn hardest every single day to be there in their community. And
Right.
for me, that was the most fun part and the most rewarding part of living internationally.
You've been doing this, the working internationally, the valuations, and other things within your company. What would you say is your intention after over 25 years of doing this?
Provide best practices to others to help others be more successful, providing it in our space, the professional services at the highest quality that we can. Being invited to write the federal law for Mexico, and interacting with the leaders around the world that I got to engage with to do that was really, a very good example of what it is that we want to achieve from our experience. We do have some big plans in place right now that we're looking to, we're bringing to reality as to what we want to do with our brand, as to how we're going to expand it, both in the US and internationally. And at the end of the day, it's providing for myself. I'm not the actual appraiser. I've always been on the operational side, and
Okay.
it's now taking, and where I've been is working on the business, not in the business like all my peers do. So what we're trying to do is take our best practices of having that balance of myself and my partners who work in the business versus myself on the business, to take those and give access to that to others.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, my final question for you, Ben, and you have been amazing on
Thank
this podcast. Oh my
thank you.
goodness.
Thank you.
Because
This is great.
I thank you. I came into your podcast not knowing anything. I'm just going to be honest. And I know as Americans, that's hard for us to admit that we don't know something. But, understanding about building your business internationally, I knew nothing about that. So I'm walking away with a lot of information, and that is because of you. So thank you so much.
Nah, thank you. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. So, my final question for you, Ben, who do you think will make a great guest on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
Well, so we've been talking a lot about relationships
Yes.
and trust.
Yes. And
And
respect.
yeah, and so going totally outside of what it is that I do,
Mhm.
and talking about Americans who has the highest rate of divorce in the world. I thought, based on this conversation of relationships and trust and all that, and our conversations, there's a colleague of mine in Provisors. Provisors is a national networking group of senior advisors to businesses, 10,000 associates across the country. I'm here in the Phoenix chapter, and there's a colleague of mine, Mara Linder, who she's a specialist on relationships when it comes to separating the relationship.
Okay.
She specifically is a mediator for couples who are looking to divorce or go into a marriage with a plan in place,
Mm-hmm.
with the number one goal as kind of what we talked about before, 3 sides to every story. If you have a single scope,
Yes.
you understand how to get in or out much easier. So it's essentially the same idea as what it is that we do, but in the relationship space of divorce mediation.
I cannot wait to speak with her about that because we all know divorces can get real messy really quickly
Yep, and very expensive.
and very expensive.
Very
Yes,
expensive. And
very
and
expensive.
so, we work a lot with attorneys and judges and litigation support. And so we understand, because our job is to help educate those judges and mediators, and it gets very, very expensive. And so if you go in with these types of advisors, it not only does it make it more affordable, but I mean, you want to walk away from that relationship cordially, hopefully, right? So
Right. That should be the goal.
that should be the goal.
Should be the goal. Yes. Well, again, thank you so much, Ben, for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Crystal. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And to my audience, to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and listening and watching. You can get Ben's podcast on YouTube Podcast and Apple Podcast. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.